Hello again, I'm Dave Apsley. I'm a forester and a natural resources specialist with Ohio State University Extension. Today I'm in Logan, Ohio at a cemetery, and I've reserved this special tree for our 100th Tree ID video in the series. When people ask me what's your favorite tree, I usually answer with a species like big leaf magnolia. But in this case, I'm talking about an individual tree that's one of my favorites. And it has been one of my favorites since I first moved to Ohio in 1994. I actually lived about a block from this tree, so there's lots of good memories and lots of picnics and even sled riding that took place near this tree. So this tree is a white oak. It's called the Logan white oak. And there's a sign just over the hill that says this tree is about 600 years old. I can't verify the age of this tree, but white oak is certainly capable of living that long. So how do we identify white oak? First of all, white oak has simple leaves. These leaves are lobed. They can be anywhere from about 4 to 8 inches in length, and they typically have 7 to 10 of these lobes. The lobes tend to have nice big spaces or gaps between them. We call those sinuses. There can be variability in the depth of these sinuses, and typically higher in the canopy you're going to have deeper cuts or sinuses, and lower in the canopy or with a young seedling or sapling, you might have sinuses that aren't quite as deep. But they always have lobes that are rounded. They will not have bristles like those species in the red oak group. Again, rounded, short petioles, 4 to 8 inches long, pretty classic white oak leaf. In the fall, the color that they produce is somewhat variable. These are starting to turn brown. I'm seeing a little yellow. Occasionally you can see some reds or purples in white oaks in the fall. It really depends on the individual plant and depends on the weather conditions that determine what color the white oaks will turn. But it's not uncommon for them to be a deep purplish color in the fall. Like all the other oaks, the buds on the tip are going to be in a cluster. If you think of a knuckle sandwich, you're going to have buds that are variable in shape and size. Usually there's several, usually 3 or more. I've seen as many as 7 or 8 or more. But again, a cluster of buds at the tip. If you think about it, that plays a role on how this tree grows if it's open grown like this one. With buds at the tip that are clustered like this, when growth occurs in the spring, branches go in nearly all directions. So when they're open grown, white oaks tend to have a nice big rounded crown similar to this tree. If they're growing in more crowded conditions, they'll grow more upright. If they're growing out in the open, they tend to spread out. But again, buds in clusters, those buds are more rounded. They're somewhat egg-shaped, but they're very broad at the base, and they will come to a tip, but they're not a sharp pointed tip. They're more of a rounded bud, and they'll be in those clusters. Another great identifier for the oaks are the acorns. These acorns on this individual tree are some of the largest and fattest white oak acorns that I've seen. Lengthwise, this is pretty typical, inch or so in length. They'll have a warty cap that'll cover about 1/3 of that acorn, and that cap will typically have a little stalk or peduncle. That little stalk is a great identifier. It's usually about 1/4 to 1/2 inch in length. It's not going to be near as long as the swamp white oak. It's going to be shorter, about 1/2 inch or less in length. Again, the cap is very bumpy or warty. It covers about 1/3 of the acorn. One of the unique things about white oak is it only takes one growing season to produce an acorn with species in the white oak group. So that pollination occurs in the spring. This acorn will mature in the fall, and about now, in fact, I just heard one hit the ground. They'll start hitting the ground, and shortly they'll crack open and start growing immediately. They'll have a root or radical that comes out, and that radical is going to try to find its way down under the leaf litter and into the soil to get started. So again, acorns, about 1 inch or so in length. Typically they're quite a bit longer than they are broad, although some of these are very, very broad as well. A bumpy, warty cap with a short peduncle, 1/2 inch or so in length. We look at the bark, it tends to be an ashy gray color. On a large tree like this, it's somewhat blocky. Occasionally on some trees you'll find patches that aren't as blocky and more smooth and white. That's not uncommon at all. And then typically as we get higher up in the canopy, you're going to find plates that peel off from the sides. Unlike the hickories, which peel from top and bottom, these peel from the sides. And it's not uncommon to find fairly large loose plates up higher on the main stems and on the branches and the canopies of white oaks. White oaks are important for a lot of reasons, but wildlife is probably one of the biggest. These acorns are very palatable. A lot of wildlife species like them, but other species depend on this tree for habitat. I've even seen bats up under the loose plates up in the higher part of the crown of a big white oak on my property. They're great for songbirds. In fact, certain species of songbirds are somewhat dependent on white oak because they feed on the insects, and the leaves are fairly adapted for them to feed off of. They can actually sit on the branch and feed on the insects that are on the leaves, the caterpillars and other insects. White oak is also important for the forest products industry. It's one of the more valuable hardwood species. It's been exported quite a bit over the years. It's also used in fine furniture, flooring, cabinetry, and even cooperage for bourbon barrels. So again, this is white oak. It's a wonderfully long-lived species. It provides stability to our forest. It's a species we've got a little bit of a concern over because we've got quite a bit of it up in our canopies, but it's not regenerating like it once did. We think that's largely due to the lack of disturbance, namely fire, that occurred naturally in white oak dominated forests. But there are other ways and other things we can do to manage these forests. Thank you so much for your time. Please take at least part of your day to enjoy it in the woods, and remember that the future of oak is in our hands.